Hey everyone, and welcome to another vlog episode here. I've been focusing a lot on the shotgun lately, but it was about time I kind of touched base on where I'm at with the rifle. Done a little bit of work to it, nothing really important, nothing really exciting. I put a new handguard on it. This one was actually damaged by the previous owner. It was too long and it was going over the edges of his muzzle brake, and the blast from it actually split the front of it. So I bought it off him cheap, and I just cut it down, sanded it nice, painted it, and put it on to replace my old one. The only real trick to that is I had to take the front sight off, put the new handguard on, put the front sight back on. It was a little bit tricky, but it's not really that exciting. So, I mean, if you're changing the handguard on your AR, there's lots of information out there, but essentially it's just two pins on the front that you knock out, slide the front off, put everything you want on, put either your new sight or your new gas block on. I also painted all the accessories this nice blue color that gets really mixed reviews in the three-gun world. People either love it or hate it. Personally, I like it, and I kind of love that people hate it. It makes it fun for me, I think. Yeah, that's really all there is. I painted it just so it kind of stands out a little more on the rack. I painted lots of my magazine base plates to match. That way, it's kind of easier for me to keep track of what's mine and what someone else's. I know a few times in competitions I've had to, say, borrow an extra magazine for my pistol from somebody for a course, and it's just easier to make sure that all the right stuff is going back to the right people. I also recently heard that some of the guys that I'm doing three-gun with want to try a few courses that require a rifle sling, so I decided I better go out and get one. As luck would have it, I got a really good deal on a Viking Tactical 2-point sling, a padded one. I'm thinking nobody wanted this bright color, so that's why it sat on the rack for a while, and then I got lucky and bought it because I kind of like bright, ugly colors on my AR. It's a competition gun. It doesn't have to be, tactical and camouflaged and hidden. I want everyone to see it. I want people to know it's there. Then I looked at the price of mounting hardware to get it actually to attach to an AR, and the price was just a little bit obscene for me. So I decided I would try just making my own mounts out of some paracord. That way the sling could come on and off easily. If I don't need it for a stage, I don't want it on the gun because it's just one more thing that might get in the way, get tangled up, slow me down. And then I posted a few pictures online, and someone said, well, how did you do that? Can you make a video showing? So, well, I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to tear this all apart. I'm going to take all this carefully tied paracord off and then attempt to retie it to kind of show the stages and what I did and how I did it. Truth be told, I'm not fantastic at knots, and I'm cheating by using a book on knot tying, but I'll find a few links to websites and YouTube videos and post them underneath to show you guys where to go for these specific knots, and I'll mention them by name, and then that way everyone kind of knows what we're talking about. All you really need to do this is, of course, an AR, which I think everyone needs one anyway. Some paracord, another one of those things that I think everyone needs to have. You find a million uses for it, and it's very cheap. I mean, $10 goes a long way in paracord. Sling, because, well, if you don't have a sling, you don't need mounting equipment for a sling. Of course, you can use a piece of paracord, but that's not ideal. It'll also be handy to have some kind of a lighter to melt the ends to keep it from fraying, because you end up with that hanging off the end of your gun, and, well, you don't want that. And a knife, of course, is handy to have just because you're going to be cutting it and trimming it to where it needs to be. Really no magic or mystery there. So I'm going to take all these off, and we'll start fresh without it and see where that gets us. Okay, we're ready to go. I got my paracord off, which was hard for me to do because I'm really not good at knot tying. In fact, just a little heads up or caveat, this video is going to be heavily edited because I'm prone to messing up and having to undo and retie and try again. And to be honest, you don't want to see me fumbling with this for an hour, so I'll condense it down to the successes. But don't let that fool you into thinking that this is super easy. It can be a little tedious and a little bit frustrating because, it's knot tying is not something that a lot of people are really good at or really familiar with, and I'm definitely one of them that's not good at it or familiar with it. So, I'll just, like I said, if it looks a little choppy or weird or suspiciously easy, it's because I've just cut out all the attempts and reattempts at it. So the first knot I'm going to do is going to be on the back here to basically, I'm going to tie through. This is actually a sling connector, so if you want your sling permanently on, you just loop your sling on there. But I'm going to loop it through there around my buffer tube. I'm going to have 2 knots and a sling loop up here, and that's where I'm actually going to clip on. And I'm going to use what's called a double bowline knot. It's pretty simple. You basically just create 2 loops, make a big loop, run it back through that, tie it down. Sounds real simple. Again, I'll try and find it online somewhere and post a link so people know exactly what I'm talking about. But that's called a double bowline. It. Now, just got to fight all the slack out of it to try and, well, just make it a cleaner, better looking knot. These knots don't slide or transfer at all, so when you tie them, that's how big the loop's going to be. So I kind of like to kind of try and work them tight so it's as tight around your buttstock or the buffer tube area as you can get it. And then that way it's less likely to come off over the back and give you a little more grief there. Of course, that second loop that we're going to tie after will sort of prevent that anyway. But this just kind of gives it a better, cleaner look. And I'm sure most of this video is probably just you staring at the top of my hands. But there is our first bowline knot. I'll get that a little closer, see if we can get some good footage of it. But that's essentially what the first one's going to look like, and then we're going to try and tie a second one on the front with just a little loop hanging off the back end. So, give me a minute, I'll see where that can get me. Okay, so, truth be told, this is attempt number 5. I find this, actually, of all the knots I did for this one was the hardest, because it's the same as this knot, but you've got to kind of account for it a little differently and reverse it in your mind to make it make sense. So I don't know why I'm struggling so much with this particular one, but here. Shark swims into the hole. Shark swims out of the hole. One way to cheat is to pull it tight, kind of check it. Yeah, that's the one. Of course, that's a nice big loop, but that has an easy remedy. I'm going to start by, I want to shorten this distance so that it sits, I want it to sit nice and tight along here. So I'm going to shorten up this distance first, and again, just like the last one, you just push it through and keep feeding it down, and slowly, very slowly, and in quite an ugly fashion, you can get everything kind of tightened up. And I think I can make this just a touch smaller here. Goes around. That through. And ta-da! So now I've got 2 bowline knots, double bowline knots, for those of us who are fancy, holding this all together. And yeah, so I'm going to start working on the front. I left this till last, or I'm going to leave it till last, is cutting these and melting the ends down to size, just in case change my mind, decide to, you know, adjust them a little more or something like that. You always want to test before you finalize, right? Yeah, so that's the back end, and now any clip you have just hooks on there. yeah, let me slide this over and we'll get started on the front. Okay, so hooking onto a handguard on the front is pretty straightforward. There's a million ways to do it, and there's really no wrong way. A great thing about Paracord is it doesn't really melt under the temperatures that are created for a handguard. You have to actually expose it to fire. If you're like me and you have a key mod rail, one of the things you can do, it's a little bit hard to get it to work perfectly to actually set it up, but you can actually just kind of loop it. This is a really long piece, so this wouldn't be recommended with, use a shorter scrap piece or something. But you can just kind of poke it up through any holes you have in your handguard. And now you've got a nice little loop right here in the middle where you can kind of separate it out a bit, and then you can just put two kind of any granny knot stopper knots. Just to kind of give you a quick example, just something like that on either side, and then you've got a nice loop there that you can clip onto. Personally, I don't like that because it's the easy way. That's what a smart man would do. And ask my wife, I'm a bit of a putz, bit of a fool. So I'm going to do it kind of the hard way. I'm going to need a longer strip of cord here, but I'm going to essentially tie a knot in the middle of my rope and then tie that onto here, and then that's how I plan to finish it nicely with a knot afterwards. So I'm actually going to be using 3 different knots for this, and kind of do it in stages to show, and again I'll name them and see if I can find links. The first is called an Alpine Butterfly knot, and this is essentially just to put a loop nicely in the middle of a long piece of rope. So if you chained up a couple of these, you could use it for hanging food or something when you're backcountry hiking. It seems to me a very useful knot to know. But yeah, so you just take it, lay it in your hand, and you wrap it. So you've got these three nice lines. And then this one here crosses over. You want to kind of elongate this one at the bottom. And then this big loop that's been elongated comes around and through. Oh, lost it. Let's start fresh. So let's review. 2, 3 wraps. Fold over. Elongate this middle one. And bring it around and through. And that is your Alpine Butterfly knot. And now that's way too big of a loop, of course. I just need to be able to clip something onto it, so I'm going to go with something a little more in that size range. So just pull each end, kind of tighten it down. It might be easier, it doesn't show well on camera, but you can slip something like I have one of these dummy shotgun shells I'm working on. You can slip it through the loop and tighten it down that way. And then that way you just have one more thing that's a little bit more rigid to tie to and keep it from sliding around too bad. So there's my butterfly loop. A little smaller probably wouldn't hurt. I'm not using very big clips, so don't want too much hanging off the end. But play with the size, make sure it's good and tight. And there we have it. That's our kind of step 1. Alright, so now that we've got the butterfly knot in there, or the butterfly loop rather, we're going to use this actually for pull lashing, but it'll make it hold onto here nicely. You can cheat and just tie a quick loop and granny knot it, but then it might be prone to kind of sliding back and forth. I want something that as you're pulling on it, it'll tighten up, just in case. So this one is, it's just a basic pull lashing. You're going to lay this out in a kind of an S shape, and I'm going to place the rifle on top, but just to kind of show you, I'm going to place 50 BMG bullet that I've got lying around in here. This left side is going to come up and loop through there. And this right side that has all this big mess is going to come up and loop through here. And then they tie together. And as it pulls, it snugs itself. And I'm going to tie the ends together with, you can use any finishing knot. I like the surgeon's knot because, again, it adds a little bit of mass. It's nice and flat. It looks nice. And we'll see how that goes. So I want this knot on the right side of the rifle, or on the left side of the rifle, because I'm right-handed. So I'm going to flip the rifle over, lay it all out nice, and see if I can tie it on without embarrassing myself in front of a camera. So here's my rifle. And I'm just going to push it back and out of the way for a second. And I want that in the middle. That's going to go like this. That's going to go down there. And then I'm just going to lay the rifle on top of it and set it here. Now, I don't want to get too far back because it'll hook in here, and then when I go to actually break my action open to clean it, it'll get bound up. I don't want to put it on here because I'm worried it'll slide off the edges. So I'm actually going to go from about here forward. So I'm just going to set this here. This is going to come around and get led through the front. And I'm actually kind of locking them into the weaver mounts here, the Picatinny rail at the top. It actually lines up perfectly. Apparently a Picatinny rail is just about the perfect width to fit a piece of paracord. And then this mess is just going to get fed through here. And same thing. Just going to lock it up. You can kind of slide around where it loops together here. If you want to loop it and tie it at the bottom, that's a great way to do it. I'm actually going to try and tie it on the side here. That way it's got a little extra width. I've got a little bit more room here to tie, that like it's taller than it is wide because of the rail. So just pull these nice and tight, hold them together, check the other side. Good thing I looked, because I pinched my knot. Okay, so flip it back carefully and tighten everything down. Alrighty, so the next knot is very handy to know, especially if you're into things like fly fishing, because it's actually how you tie a lot of like your tippet to your leader, or your leader to your line itself, line to back, and things like that. A very common one is called the surgeon's knot. It can be used for a million things. It's very similar to a square knot. I'll just kind of try and show you quick on this, but again, I will try to post a link if I can find one to somebody who does a better job of showing it. But essentially what you do is you make a loop, so this is what you're tying around, and then you loop over left, over right, and 1, 2, 3, so 3 or 4 times. Just make sure you count how many. So in this case I did 3. And then if you went left over right, now you go right over left. 1, 2, 3. And then you pull it. And it works really well with things like fishing line or thread, hence why surgeons use it. And it looks pretty good if you can get the right amount of loops and tighten it up just right. It'll actually be a beautiful parallel or a symmetrical knot, and it's nice and flat. You see, it's only about as wide as the paracord is, and wide this way. So I'm hoping that on the side of the rifle it'll actually kind of give a little bit of grip, and it won't be too intrusive or pushing against my hand funny when I'm holding it. I'd hate to have just kind of this big ball there annoying me like a monkey's paw knot. So that's how you tie it. Again, I'll try and post a link to a little bit better of a description of that. But let's see if we can get that to work on here. Okay, so this is attempt number 3. So with the surgeon's knot, again, we're going to start here and go around 1, 2, and a third time. And then I'm going to kind of pull it tight just to try and get any slack out of there. You don't want this sliding because if it bumps and jumps over, it'll kind of saw through and weaken itself. And then for the second part of the knot, just 1, 2, and 3. Pull it down. Try to kind of square it out and even it off. And again, pull it nice and tight. And, well, if it's good enough for surgery, it's probably good enough for gunsmithing. Nice and tight feeling knot. Last thing to do now is kind of tighten it, check it all, and then I'm actually going to hook my clips to it and see how it feels, make sure nothing's too loose, and then I'll come back and just kind of trim and melt all the ends. Well, hello and welcome to a wider view of the rest of my little gun room, project room, you name it. So I've got my sling here, and I just attached it quickly with just a big bulky. This is actually, I think, a carabiner for climbing gear. And on the front is, I think it's from a company called Night Eyes. Yeah, and they've got I think a 10 or 25 pound weight rating on them. I'll likely get proper clips for the sling itself. They just seem to be really hard to find lately, and I'm not sure why that is. But anyway, this is the only part that's really temporary. These I might upgrade to be honest. I don't know, depends how much I like the Paracord idea, but basically the sling just slides on. Set it here, and everything didn't light on fire, didn't fly off. For the record, the foundation of my house is right behind the camera and like a bookshelf, so the gun's empty. This is safe to do so. You know, don't do this with your family wandering around behind the camera, but just comes up nice and easy. No problems. It's not in the way right here. I can still reach a belt and put a magazine in. I don't want to move this further forward, which a lot of guys do. Some people prefer to move it to the front so you can kind of operate everything inside, and then it's, you know, so just on the outside of your arm reach. I like the idea of going around the outside. To me, that just, I don't know, seems to fit better. Yeah, I've got my sling, a little bit of black electrical tape on there. Again, once I get the proper clips and I go to the range and shoot a bit and practice and try it a little bit, I'll likely cut these down to the proper size. This for now is just to keep them from slapping me in the face while I'm playing with it. You know, it's just basic nylon webbing, so cut it and then hit it with something hot to melt it so it doesn't fray on you, same as any nylon or webbing. No real need to worry there. And yeah, that's really all there is to it. I'm going to take this, cut them down so it's not hanging out funny. Knot looks good on there. Yeah, I'd say this project was a bit of a success so far, but let's finish it and see if it still is. Alright, so just tested it, you know, slinging it over my shoulder, seeing how it feels. And one of the things I noticed is that this is just a little bit looser on here than I would like. It's not going to affect usage at all. It's just not, I don't know, it just feels a little sloppy to me. So I'm going to take a minute and just work these knots a little bit more to try and get them a touch tighter. But I mean, that's not really exciting video footage, so I'll spare you the bore. But just a heads up, that is one of the things to watch for, is all of these knots, everything, as you put weight on them, they'll the knots will tighten, and the paracord or any cord you're using may stretch a little bit. So just check them every once in a while and see if they're where you like them. And you know, it's an easy fix. It takes, you know, seconds a piece, but just something to watch for. Alright, so last thing to do is to kind of cut these little excess bits off and melt them so that they look nice like that and not falling apart like this. Might be hard to get it all in here, but I mean, it's a pretty straightforward process. You just want to cut these down to an appropriate length. Too short and you run the risk of actually damaging the knot while you're melting, or it might actually be able to pop out of there. So you want to leave just, you know, a little bit. Not this much, that's too much, it'll be slapping you in the face. And you just chop it, you know, use a sharp knife. I should have put a new blade in here, but I mean, it all works, right? And then grab your handy dandy lighter and just apply a little bit of fire. You want to let it get nice and warm, get good and melty, and then just tap it with the side, or you know, anything flat object. A screwdriver would work too. That's really all there is to it. That one's not quite as melted down as I'd like. If you get them good melted and hit them, it'll actually kind of fatten out and mushroom out the top a bit. And then that actually helps secure the knot a bit more, because then it's got to actually fit through there. It's less likely to slip. Let's get the other one here and see. A little more. One thing to really be cautious about when you're doing this is make sure you're not melting your gun. Fire and heat go up, but it also heats up around, and if you're like me and you use the same table for everything, you might want to make sure your gunpowder and ammunition are on a separate pile. That's just common sense. Alright, so let me slide the other half of the gun over. See if I can get it into view. That's about where we want to be. So again, check your knots, they're all pretty tight. Kind of a quick tug, and then same thing, pick a spot that looks reasonable to cut it. Find a spot that looks reasonable to cut it. I like about that much overhang, I think, makes me feel safe and secure. And then same thing, use what separates us from the animals, your opposable thumbs, to make fire. Alright, and then pack it down nice, and hit the other side. Good and melty, there we are, pretty well perfect. And then tap it a bit to mushroom it. And ideally, that's kind of what you'll end up with. Oh, gotta get her in the camera though. Something like that. It's pretty functional, and I can't really think of a whole lot cheaper of a way to have a sling mount on your AR. Well, at least a quick detach one. I guess you could use a little less paracord and loop it through some things, or just tie it on quick. But to me, this is kind of the minimum I want to do. Let's throw it back on again and see if it works again. I can't imagine what could have changed, but hey, I kind of like slinging it on, and I'm excited because it's new. Okay, so just one quick thing about the sling. If you're like me, and you'll probably just end up using these, you know, random cheapy carabiners that you got lying around. If they're a little narrow like mine is, you kind of run the risk of this webbing working its way underneath and kind of popping out. It's not likely, it'll probably just jump off the front of it, but every once in a while, if you get it, you know, while you're running, you get a little bit of a bump there, and at just the right amount, it'll come off. So what you can do is you can take all of your extra paracord, you know, little cut-off bits and things like that, and do a bit of a figure-8 loop. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to feed this through normally where I would hook the clip on. And this is really a long scrap piece, so I'm going to kind of choke it down a little bit, but heck with it, paracord's cheap. Take it, loop it around your finger, and then whoop, back through the front end where your finger was, and just pull it tight. And you've got just a basic little loop. This is the same thing you see on tons of little zipper pulls and things like that. If you look at one that you've got on, you know, a backpack or something, it's pretty easy to sort of reverse engineer how it's done, and it's not going anywhere. And then you clip your carabiner onto that instead. Then it's got a little bit more motion, and it's less likely to kind of work its way underneath that clip. Well, that's the end of the project. I got everything kind of heated and cleaned up. I got the clip set up. It seems to hang about where I think I want it. I'm not super familiar with Sling, so I might want to adjust it up or down a little bit. But again, that's why I use the electrical tape to hold it in place, because I still got to tweak it, play with it, but that's all kind of personal preference stuff. I mean, yeah, that's really all there is to it. If you don't like the video, blame the guy on Facebook who randomly told me to show him how I did it so he could do it. And if you like the video, probably thank the same guy. Yeah, that's all there is to it. If you have any questions, don't be shy. If you have any suggestions for the next video, feel free to let me know. Yeah, we'll see you next time.